Hey everybody, my name is Brie George and I'm an alcoholic. I'm really grateful to be here tonight. I was talking with some folks before. My voice might be a little shaky for the first 3 minutes or so, but when I step out of the way, I'll let God kind of come in there. But I'll get some of the pleasantries out of the way. My sobriety date is September the 18th of 2014. I have a sponsor. I'm honored to sponsor other alcoholics. I have a home group. It's the There Is a Solution group of Alcoholics Anonymous. We meet Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. and I have a service position and all that good jazz. I do the things that were suggested that I do from the very beginning, and I continue to do those to this day. So I do want to apologize in advance. I'm getting over a cold, so if I start to sound like Marge from The Simpsons towards the end, I apologize. But I'll just kind of jump right in. I grew up in a really, really great home. I'm from Massachusetts. We lived there on and off for about 6 years. Mother and father, older sister, older brother, and it was just a really good household. I mean, there was nothing to complain about at home. We were very fortunate. Everything we needed and wanted, we got, plus so much more. So I can tell you, even as a kid, I mean, there's nothing that happened in my life, no experiences as a child or through my life that caused me to be an alcoholic. I mean, I had those same tendencies well before I even picked up a drink, those same behaviors. So we bounced around a lot when I was younger. My father's work took us from Massachusetts to North Carolina, back and forth a little bit, and I remember as a young girl, I always had that feeling of just being so separate from everyone, because we'd go back to Massachusetts and I'd start a school year there, and we'd move mid-year to a different school system, and just a lot of bouncing around when other kids, I had this jealousy that, these kids were able to establish relationships, and I was just that weird kid that couldn't do it. I was just so self-centered to the core as a child. We moved here finally. I think I was probably about 5, and I remember going to school and doing okay in school. Things were still good at home and being really active in sports, and I mean, I had a really good childhood. There was not much drinking in the home. My mom would enjoy a glass of wine, and I say enjoy because she is certainly not a drinker like I am. She would have a glass of wine every once and again with dinner or on special occasions, and just nothing really to complain about. Now, when I got sober, I tell you that my childhood was terrible, and that my parents didn't pay enough attention to me, and they bounced us around a lot, and I wasn't able to establish friendships with people. But that's very far from the truth. There was a lot of love in that house. We were a very strong family unit, and kind of going through school, I'm not going to stay in the problem too much, because I'm really blessed with the solution that Alcoholics Anonymous has given to me today. So I'll kind of give you guys a Cliff Notes version of what life was like then. Did okay in school, not a whole lot of trouble. My brother is about 1 year and 3 months older than I am, so we were thick as thieves, boy. Let me tell you, when we got in trouble hard, and we got in trouble together. So we did that frequently, and we would always spend time together. I felt like he was my best friend because I was just so selfish and so uncomfortable in my own skin. I felt like so separate from everybody else. I mean, I wasn't pretty enough or smart enough or cool enough. I wasn't funny. I mean, all of those just self-absorbed, just fearful thoughts. I mean, they riddled me for years. Still did okay in school all the way through middle school, and towards the end of middle school, I remember my first drunk. I had a couple sips of alcohol here and there at like family functions, but my first drunk, I was 12 years old, and we were at one of my brother's buddies' friend's house, and his parents had gone out of town, and there was a bunch of older kids there, and I could identify with them because I didn't feel so judged by them. I felt like I was so judged by people my own age for some reason. I don't know why age had a factor in there. But we were sitting in a room, and everybody was passing around this big old tumbler of liquor, and they're all just kind of taking sips from it and just passing it around, and they had just filled it up and passed it over to me, and I downed the whole thing, and I remember this like magical moment for me, like the minute that I took that sip and it entered into my body, that that self-centered fear, that anxiety, the social awkward, all of the things, all of the jealousies that I had, the fear of what you thought of me, all of that went away, and I just finally felt a part of. And that was the first time that I can remember feeling like I was level with anyone when I took that first drink. And it was glorious for about a half hour, and then shortly after that I got violently sick and blacked out, and my sister had to rescue me, and that quite literally characterizes the rest of my drinking career. When I drank with a purpose every single time. Through high school, we didn't drink every day. I wasn't a daily drinker, but I can tell you as frequently as I could get alcohol, I was really seeking it, because I didn't have that relief. I didn't have any kind of solution to me. I didn't know how to get outside myself. I didn't know how to make those fears go away. And we had as a child, we had gone to church, and we had really strong belief system instilled in us with morals and values, and we were taught to believe in a God. And slowly, as I continued drinking, just those things started to go away, those values that I grew up with, and they didn't become so paramount to anything else. And when I was 12, we found out my dad was diagnosed with a pretty serious illness, and I was not very concerned with that. I was very fearful. I remember when we received that information, I remember running up to my room and, not really being present for that man. And he was a real strong dude. I mean, he was amazing. He was the rock in our family. He worked his tail off to make sure that we were supported and had everything that we needed. And I was just so selfish. I didn't really care about how you were affected by something. It was all about me and how things were affecting me and what can I do to not feel this way. So for the next 4 years, I continued with school, and when I was 16, we knew that my dad was very sick, and that he had a pretty serious diagnosis, and he passed away when I was 16. And that was, for us, that was just that glue that held not just my family but the extended family together, and it just fell to pieces. And I remember that it talks about in our literature, every man, woman, and child has a fundamental idea of God, and I certainly did. But at that moment, I can tell you, when my father passed away, was where I walked away. I had no faith in God. I was really upset. I was, building all that anger, and, how could you take this man from us? He was such an important part of our lives, and that's when the seething resentment started to build, and that's when the drinking really took off for me. So when I turned 20, I got married, and I think I got married at like 19. Somehow passed high school, not too sure why. I'll just kind of speed through the rest of the drinking, and I got married at like 19 or 20, and then separated at 20 as a direct result of my drinking. It had nothing to do with that man. He was a very good man. I always sought out relationships with folks where I could easily manipulate you and lie to you and get what I needed from you, because otherwise you were of no use to me, unfortunately. So that relationship ended, and I was on my way to treatment for the second time at 20. Now, there were some other things that had come into my story, and, drinking, it got me to where I wanted to go, but it was starting to not be enough. It was starting to not work for me anymore. And so I figured that when I went to treatment and I dried out for about 30 days, that all I had to do was lay off the other stuff and, just control my drinking. This is what my thought process was. Surely I can do that because I see other folks do it. And so I certainly hadn't identified as alcoholic yet. I had been to some fellowship meetings and was not willing to open my heart to the message because they were talking about stuff like God, and that was not good for me at that point. I didn't want to hear that message of hope. So I dried out for about 30 days, and as soon as I got on the plane to come home from Massachusetts back to North Carolina, the very first thing that I did before the wheels of the plane even left the ground was picked up a drink. So for the next few months, I tried to control my drinking, and what that looked like for me was blackouts every single day. I would drink and drive. I had no regard for anyone's safety. People driving on the road. I was becoming very violent. I would pick fights with people at bars. I mean, big dudes, like thinking that I was going to be able to win that battle. That's how arrogant and crazy I was. I was just completely insane. For me at that point, the material was very important. I thought that the job, the relationship, the house, the car, all of those things would save me. Surely they would, but that proved to not be the truth for me, because I did end up having an okay career. It was pretty well paying, and unfortunately I wasn't employable. I worked there for about 3 years, and I was lying to these people. I was drinking while I was at work. I would make this solemn oath, like our literature talks about, never to drink at work and only to drink at home, and all of the things. I mean, I went through that whole paragraph in our literature. I can identify with just about every single one of them, where if I made a promise to myself that I was going to wait till a certain time to drink, or I was absolutely so hungover the next day that I wasn't going to drink that night, but bet your bottom dollar, as soon as I left work that night, we'd close the bar down, and it was a really miserable existence. So all of those feelings that in the beginning, like the fear and the anxiety and the worry and just all of that self-centeredness in the beginning of my drinking, alcohol was effective for a very short period of time. But then over time, it stopped working. It stopped getting me to where getting the effect that I needed. It was not enough. So my last, we'll say roughly about 6 months of my drinking career, it looked like this. I had burned every single bridge worthwhile in life. I destroyed all relationships. I was completely homeless. There was a few months in there where a friend let me out of the goodness of her heart, knowing that I was in a rough way, but not knowing that I was just manipulating her to be able to have somewhere to stay. She allowed me to stay on her couch with her for a little while, and so I'd stolen everything from everyone. I had lied to everyone. I had manipulated everyone, and I was up against a lot of legal trouble, and I was really fearful, and I wanted to die. Several points throughout my life, I had really just, I wanted to die so badly that I would look up on my phone painless ways to kill myself, because I didn't know of any other solution. So that fateful night that I was out there on the streets anyway, I was homeless, and I was staying in a mechanic's garage with someone who drinks just like I do, and when we'd wake up in the morning and somehow be able to just scrounge up enough change or dollars to be able to walk down to the gas station to get some alcohol, and throughout my drinking career, the withdrawals got so much worse. They were awful. I mean, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have to have a drink of something to be able to even start my day. I'd have to put something into my body to be able to look at people, to talk to people, and still have that fear there. I mean, it was a pretty miserable place to be. So that night, my family, God bless them, my brother and my sister, they loved me very much, and they were really worried about me because they didn't know where I was for a couple months, and they had reached out to some of my old associates, if you will, and hunted people down. They would follow folks from places and ask them where I was, and God bless them, thank God that they did. I heard a knock at the metal mechanic store that night, the mechanic shop, and I heard my brother's voice, and I was like, oh boy, here we go. I thought that surely the police would be surrounding the place, and I was going to prison for a pretty good long time, and I tried to bolt up the stairs. I remember it like it was yesterday. I tried to run, because that's what I do best, is run when I'm trying to run away from a solution. And I tried to run up the stairs, and I looked out this little window, and I saw people outside, but it wasn't police. It was people that really cared for me and loved me, and they were there because they wanted to try to save me. And I remember going back downstairs, and my friend had opened the door for my brother, and he had a big smile on his face, and he said, the only thing I have for you here is a bottle of water and a Cliff Bar, because I'm sure you haven't been eating. And he gave me a big hug, and then they quite literally handcuffed me to the dashboard of a Jeep and brought me to the police station to turn myself in, and that was one of the best days of my life. Now I can tell you that no consequence, absolutely no consequence, got me sober, because I did drink shortly after this. So what I did is I sat in a holding cell with my hands cuffed behind my back, and I can tell you for the first time, and I can't even tell you years, over a decade, that was the first time that I ever felt peace, because I knew that I did not have to get up. I knew that I did not have to go and try to find some way to get what I needed to get that effect, or at least what I thought was going to save me, and I had some peace knowing that. So I sat in the custody of the Wake County court system for about a month, and while I was there were some pretty amazing women that told me about a treatment facility that they were saving lives, and they were helping people with problems just like me to get and stay sober. And I had this old prejudice about AA. That's how arrogant I was. She explained to me that they strongly suggested that you join a fellowship, and Alcoholics Anonymous was highly suggested by this treatment facility, and I'm forever grateful that they did. So when I got out of jail, I went straight to that place, and I still had all that fear because I was just dried out. I mean, there was no solution. There was no developing a relationship with God. There was nothing there yet, so that fear was still riddled. I mean, I was miserable. But I looked around at the folks there who had been there maybe a week, 2 weeks, and they had smiles on their faces, and they looked like they were happy, and they didn't look the way that I felt. They sure didn't. And so what I did do is I stayed there, and there were several meetings that we were required to go to, and I would go to them, and I wasn't willing to hear a solution yet. So what I did do is I picked back up, although I knew I didn't want to. I hadn't gotten a sponsor yet, hadn't gotten a home group, and I picked up for about a week and a half, and it was real ugly, and I thought that was going to be my solution for me. I thought that, me being able to control my drinking was going to make things better, but it certainly didn't. But what I did do after that, after I was good and done and ready to get sober, I got a sponsor. And this woman, God bless her, she had her hands full with me when we started working through the book. She would come to that treatment facility and meet with me every single week. Every week that woman would read out of the book to me. Now, I was still so selfish that I would sit with her and I'd absorb some of what she was reading, but really most of it would go in one ear and out the other because I was just thinking about myself all the time. And she was able to help me with those moments where I wasn't listening, or those moments where I was drowning in self-pity. And she gave me two very vital suggestions. The first one being go to God, and I had no idea how to pray, and she would say the God word, and I would, the part of our literature where it talks about something to the effect of, you talk to the new man and watch his hope rise as you speak about his alcoholic problem, and then his face falls when you speak of spiritual matters. And that was me, 100%. When you talked about God, I couldn't identify. When you talked about all the problems that drinking caused you and how much trouble you had and how you lost your family, or gave them away, rather, that I could identify with, but I had a real hard time with the God idea. So what I did was I started asking people, what helped you? Other than getting on your knees at night, in the morning, what helped you develop a relationship with God? And they said, work through the steps, be honest, stop lying. And I was like, okay, that sounds good, I can do that. So that's just what we did. And the first time going through the steps, it was icky and painful, and I remember maybe being 30 days sober, and I couldn't wait to go to everybody and apologize to everyone. I'm so sorry, I'm sober now, and life's good, and I'm better. But my sponsor put me in my place, and she said, easy, Tiger, we'll get there, and we did. So we wrote out inventory, and we went through that, and the reason I want to talk about one of my first inventories that I wrote with my sponsor, there was some really deep-seated resentments that I had, and one of which was with God, and I hate it. It pains me to even say that to this day because that's the most important thing in my life today, but I had a real deep resentment with God, and so God bless my sponsor, we sat there for 7 hours on my fifth step, and when we got to that part about the resentment with God, I remember I was hoping, I just knew that she was going to be like, oh, I'm so sorry for you, and I went through and explained why I was so upset with God, and, how I said that, God had taken my dad from me, and he killed my cousin who was my best friend, and all of the reasons why I was upset with God. And she she fed it to me, and she put me in my place. And something that was so powerful for a self-centered alcoholic like me, she looked at me and she said, you speak very highly of your father and the impact he had on your life and all of the amazing experiences you had with that man. What a blessing to have had somebody in your life for 16 years. There are so many people who haven't had the opportunity to have that person in their life. And I was like, oh, she's right, man. There was another part where, and the reason I'm talking about this is because honesty was really scary when I first got sober. I was afraid of what you thought of me. I was afraid of what my sponsor thought of me. I wanted to project a certain image and all of the things that were just so vain and arrogant. And when we got to the end of that first inventory, she said, okay, so tell me what you're not telling me. And I was like, what do you mean? And she had already asked me 2 or 3 times, and she said, what's the one thing you're not telling me about? And I was like, oh man, I remember people saying that you had to be honest about all this, and if you weren't, you would drink again. And I knew I didn't want to drink. I knew for sure that I absolutely did not want to drink. So I looked at her and I was like, listen, don't look at me, just cover your face. And she was like, okay, I'll do it. And she did, and I put my hands in my face, and I told her, and by the time I took my hands away from my face, I looked up, and she was standing there, and she was like, do you want some coffee? Would you like some cookies? And I was like, oh, wow. She didn't throw me out of her house. She didn't judge me. She didn't tell me I was a terrible person. She identified with me, and she was able to help me to figure out what I needed to do moving forward. And so from there, I continued to work through the steps, and I was starting to get real fearful working through them because I knew I was getting pretty close to working with some other folks. And I hit making amends to folks pretty hard. I wanted to make sure that I was doing that because that was what was suggested to me, and there were some really powerful ones that I've made in sobriety that they've been unbelievable, because all those folks that I told you about a little while ago, the ones that I literally stole everything from, not just materially, like I stole their security, I stole their peace of mind. Those poor folks, like they would literally stay up thinking, okay, well, if she's not in a car accident dead, she might be in the hospital somewhere, or God willing, maybe in jail, because she'll be safe at least. And I got to go face-to-face to those people because that's what was suggested, and I did that, although it was very, very scary in the beginning, and I cried my way through just about every single one of them. I still did them. There was my mom. That was a pretty big deal for me. I hadn't talked to her in years because of my drinking and all the harm that I had caused her, and I was able to locate her, and she was in another state, and I called her, and she didn't answer, so I sent her a text. I said, hey, it's me, and I was seeing if you might be willing to sit with me for a few minutes, if I could take you for a coffee. And she said, absolutely, and she set a date and time, and she flew to North Carolina to sit with me, and that was a really powerful experience. And I don't know if I'm making sobriety sound like really, really good and amazing, and I certainly haven't done this thing perfectly, and I particularly talk about this one because this is why I haven't done it perfectly. It was suggested to be honest and thorough from the start, and I was not honest with that woman when I sat down and made amends with her. She asked a question that could have potentially put me in jail if I answered it honestly, and I did not answer it honestly. So I went through that amends with her, and I called my sponsor later that night, and I had just left the meeting, and I felt awful. It was so easy for me to tell a lie before, and it was so easy for me to just manipulate people and get them to feel bad for me, but I was starting to change. My life was starting to change, and I was starting to care about people and want to live differently. So I called my sponsor immediately, and I told her what I had done, and she handed me my tail, and what she suggested was, since I had sat with her already face-to-face, that if I wanted to not drink, that I needed to pick up the phone, call that woman immediately, and tell her what I had done, because I didn't want to start this relationship off on a lie. And that's exactly what I did, and I can tell you that the relationship that I have with that woman today it's unbelievable. And she had some health issues, and I am self-supporting, I'm independent, and my spouse and I are able to have my mom live with us now, and she's been with us for a few months, and that's how life changes over time. That woman who cared so much for me and put up with all my stuff, I'm able to help her, even just a small fraction, even if it's just for a little while. That's the least I can do for that woman. So we continued to work through the steps, and that God idea that I was talking about, that one that I was so afraid of, it started to change a little bit, because in the beginning I felt like I was just, like when I'd get on my knees at night and I'd pray, I felt like I was literally just praying to the back of my eyelids. There was like no connection. I didn't feel super connected to God, and it had nothing to do with God and everything to do with me. I wasn't willing at that time to let go of old prejudice that I had against my old belief in God, old ideas. And, what was really important for me is I had to believe in something that was really powerful. For me, it wasn't the religion that I grew up with, and I had to believe in something that was powerful and interesting and loving and kind and understanding and forgiving. And that's what I started doing. I started praying to whatever it was. I couldn't see it, but I prayed to that idea of what that strength and that love and just that peace that was starting to come through me. And I started to feel it. I started to feel a little more peace, and some of the fears were going away as I continued to make amends to folks and right wrongs as I went along, and I could see God in those moments. Although I tend to come in the way, and when fear comes in, if it's an amends or going to apologize to someone or a new experience, fear comes in. But when I do allow God to work in my life, and when I allow Him to be present in that moment, I know He's here. I know He is, and I know that when I remind myself, how would I react in this situation if God was present in this room right now? That's a healthy reminder for me, because when I get in the way, I start to act out. Old behaviors come out. I can be cruel or unkind, and I certainly wouldn't do that if He was present here, and I know He is, and I constantly have to remind myself that. I have to invite Him with me where I go. I have to invite Him into difficult situations or experiences, and when I do that, it goes a lot more smoothly, and that's what my sponsor suggested. At that point in sobriety, she was like, listen, you're having a hard time really feeling that connection. Why not remind yourself that He's here? So when you're walking into a meeting and you're nervous or whatever it is, why not say, hey, God, can you come in with me? And I started doing that, and I started feeling more at peace. So I had worked on the relationship with God and continued to this day, and I got to the 12th step, and this was a really scary point for me, because I thought I was gonna break someone if I was sponsoring someone. So we got to step 12, and my sponsor said, okay, this is it. You're gonna start working with some folks now. And I said, okay. And I had left that treatment facility and moved into sober living, and I was about to move out. I think I lived there for 3 or 4 months, and I was about to move out, and this woman, she had just came from detox, and she had moved in, and I was moving, and probably the next few days, and the day before I moved out, she said, hey, would you sponsor me? And I was petrified, boy. I knew I had to say yes, and I knew that this is what I was supposed to do, but I was so afraid. This woman was so intelligent. She was literally like an astrophysicist or something, and I couldn't read well. It was just a you-know-what show. It was awful the first time I met with her, and it wasn't because of her. So I remember the first time I sat with her, and we started going through the book, page 1, just like my sponsor did with me, and my hands were shaking, and my voice was shaking, and I was messing up words, and she was correcting me. It was just awful. It was a terrible experience. But it had nothing to do with the fact that I was working with another alcoholic, and everything to do with my own self-centeredness. I was fearful of not sounding right or mixing up a word, and when I left that day after reading with her for a little while, and I went to God and reminded myself that I know He's there, and I know that everything's okay, and all I'm doing is carrying the same exact message to another alcoholic that my sponsor did, those fears started to go away. So I had moved into a place with my spouse, and we lived with another person in recovery for a little while too, and I'm really grateful we did that, because we would all go together to meetings, or we would encourage each other, hey, let's get up and go do this, because when you leave treatment, it's so ingrained into you to go to meetings and stuff while you're there, but when you leave, you have the power of choice. And fortunately for me, I had a network of men and women that were just amazing. I wasn't driving at that point, and they would come pick me up and take me to meetings, and they would answer the phone when I called, and the phone calls sober were very different than when I was out there. I actually cared to answer the phone for people now, which is pretty revolutionary for a selfish alcoholic like me. So I began to be employable, which was amazing because I hadn't held down an honest job for I can't even tell you how long. And I got a job and again, didn't do it perfectly. It was really difficult starting to work sober. And when I did, I worked my tail off. And I remember that there was a short period where I was really attracted to the money, having some money since I hadn't for so long. Being able to buy a cell phone was cool, and I was smoking cigarettes then, and I couldn't wait to be able to buy my own cigarettes. And so I remember my first week or two working there, I was working like 60-plus hour work weeks, and I had been to like one meeting a week when I started working there, and I remember calling my sponsor, and I was crying because I was miserable, and I was thinking about drinking. And I called her, and I fed her all my stuff, and she gave me some pretty valuable suggestions, and they were really simple. Go to a meeting, be of service, continue working with other alcoholics, go to God. I mean, all of the simple things. And there was something really cool she said in that conversation. I said, I feel like I'm doing my best with what I've got right now. I'm not driving, and I'm getting to as many meetings as I can. And she put me in my place again, and she said, when there's light, darkness is really attracted to light. It doesn't want to prey on the dark. I mean, it's already got plenty of that. But when there's darkness present, and it sees people that are trying to live differently, it sees people that are trying to live a spiritual life, it's gonna be attracted to that. And I said, all right, so what do I do? She said, you put your shield of armor on and you fight back. And that's what I did. And work became not so important to me. And I was able to set boundaries. Those were really important for me. Set boundaries with, hey, listen, I can't work Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday past 3 p.m. without question. This is what's important for me. If you need me to be the employee you need me to be. And they were very respectful of it. I didn't go and shout from the rooftops, hey, I'm in recovery, because it's not suggested to do that unless I can serve a purpose. But in that moment, I went to my boss, and it did, and I asked him to, keep that private. It was important to me that he knew what the reason was, because he was interested to know, and I did that. So I continued working, and most importantly, work wasn't so important to me, and all those feelings of the money and all of those things that were becoming important weren't anymore. I started to have more peace when I was working with more alcoholics. I started to have more peace when I was showing up to my home group before it actually started, which was awesome because I could help set up and make coffee and greet people when they got there and be of service. And it's amazing that this program has taught me just very simple, basic things in life. Like we learn them as kids, like play nice with the other kids. And if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. And say your prayers before you go to bed. I mean, they're all really basic, but I was just such a child and so insane that I had to relearn all of these things to be able to be in society, period, because I was not good to be around any of you folks before I found a solution of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've had some really powerful God moments in my sobriety. My dad, when I was a little girl, we always used to go out and look up at the stars, and this was really cool for me, and I was really interested in astronomy and what that looked like. Like, we'd go out, there was a couple meteor showers, but we'd always look up, and we'd look at the constellation Orion. I'm not too sure why. I don't know what was the significance of that. I remember there was one night, it was right around Christmas, and my dad, he was a real serious dude, but he was just a jolly guy. He was such a good man, and I was walking my dog, and I looked up at the sky, and I remember seeing Orion, and I was just immediately at peace, because I don't know what it is about that, but it just brings a peace over me when I see that. And I looked up, and I waved, and I said, hey, Dad, and as soon as I looked to the right, I just saw this big shooting star, and it was such a cool thing to me, because under normal circumstances, I mean, I can remember 1,000 times in my life asking God to show me a sign or something, show me what you need me to do, give me a sign and I won't kill myself, or give me a sign. And I was just so crazy making these ultimatums with God, and that was a really, really cool thing for me. I do absolutely continue to work with other alcoholics to this day, and I hope that I always will. I haven't done this thing perfectly still as well. I know I said that before. I hung on to an amends that needed to be made a few years back, and last year I had made amends to my brother. I felt like that man had done me so much more wrong than I had done to him, and I felt like he did so many more bad things, and he was the one to blame, not me. Surely he's the one who owes me an apology, and so what I did do is I talked with my sponsor, and I continue to do inventories, and that day where I was going to meet with him and he agreed to sit with me, I remember calling my sponsor on the way, and I was like, listen, I want to be honest. I still feel like he's done me more harm than I've done him. And she said, hey, listen, that's okay. I mean, you're a self-centered alcoholic. Of course you do. And I said, okay. And I said, how do I not feel this way? You know, I've gone to God. I continue to go to God. I'm doing all the things you're suggesting I do, but I'm still hanging on to this. She said, well, you're not having faith that God's going to take care of it. But she said, what you can do and what you have the opportunity to do today is walk into the present moment with this man. She said, you can leave the past. You get to leave all of those things behind and just walk into this moment, into this day with this man and start a brand new relationship with him. And she prayed with me, and I normally when I pray, I close my eyes, but I was driving and she prayed, and it really, it was a really amazing experience. So we met out in nature, and that's one of the places where I love to see and feel God. Just his presence there is extra present for me when I'm in nature. And we sat down at this table, and the way that we grew up, it's not that we weren't allowed to show emotion at home. It's not that we weren't allowed to talk about how we felt. We just didn't. You know, if we had a bad day, we said we were okay. If we wanted to cry, we bit our lip and just kind of like toughed through it. I'm not too sure why, but we just did. And I think I can maybe count on less than one hand the times I saw my brother cry, and I saw my dad cry my entire life one time. So we sat, and I took the time and said the amends to him, and as I was saying it, I started to cry, and I'm like, please God, help me stop crying, and I was able to choke my way through it, and when I looked up, that he had tears in his eyes, and that's a big deal for my family. We don't show a whole lot of emotion. We do those kind of like awkward side hugs when we see each other. It's not like a full-on, friend hug, and we have amazing relationships today as a result of that. So what I continued to do was everything that I've done since the beginning. I am employable, and what I talked about a little bit earlier, those legal charges, I mean, I thought I would never have a decent career ever in my life. I thought that I would never be employable somewhere. I thought that surely I was going to work somewhere that I wasn't very happy with working for the rest of my life, and that is absolutely the farthest thing from the truth. I'm not afraid to say this today. I'm a two-time felon, and I have an unbelievable career. I'm able to work with people that are in sobriety. I'm able to hire people in sobriety at the place I work for, and I get to work with other sober folks. So when we're having a rough day or it's getting busy at work, and you can see it all over someone's face, or they can see it on mine, we literally get to go out back and pray. We take a minute, we go out back, we'll hold hands, bow our heads, and pray at work, and that is not the woman that I used to be. The woman that I used to be very prejudiced to any idea of God, and today I know that that's where my solution is. I know that if I'm riddled with selfishness or fear or worry or anger, I know what the solution to my problem is. And you guys taught it to me. I mean, very plainly, it's a very simple solution, and I didn't think that it would work for me, but it has completely changed everything about my life, everything, top to bottom, from the way that I treat people to how I react to situations, and if I make a mistake, I get to go to someone and honestly say, hey, look, I was wrong, and this is why I'm wrong, and I hope that over time you can see me try to be different. And that's very different, because in arguments before or disagreements, I mean, I would go straight for the jugular. I was like a little chihuahua, I would take no prisoners, I would just say the meanest thing that I could possibly say to you to just break you. And that's not where my mind goes to today. If I say something that's not very kind to someone, I immediately feel it, and I'm like, oh no, I did it. I said it. It came out. It didn't stop at the filter point, and I am employable today, and I do have a really great career, and I have my own home, and I'm in a loving and committed relationship, which is not like me. I did not I was not a very faithful woman. I didn't really care for anyone's needs or being honest in a relationship, and I am today, which is a really big deal. I'm self-supporting, which is another big deal. The money and like, yeah, it's great. I have a car and I've got some of the material stuff, and really, if I sit there on my best spiritual day, if I sit there and tell you that if all of it blew up tomorrow, I would be absolutely fine. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. None of that matters. The material never did fix me, never will fix me. It's nothing, and that was extremely important to me before I got sober. But I can tell you that the most important part of my sobriety has been developing a relationship with God. And I know that there might be one or two folks in here potentially that had that same struggle, and as soon as you heard me say the word God, you just stopped listening to me, and that's okay, because I did too. I would hear the God word, and I was having a real hard time with it, and I didn't want to hear what you had to say because I didn't think that God was going to help me find a solution, but it's a lie that I told myself, and it's exactly the opposite. That is the most important part of my life. It's the most important part of starting my day. It's the most important part of continuing throughout the day. I mean, I get to live peacefully. I don't have to be riddled by all that fear and all the anxiety and all that misery that I talked about that I had while I was drinking. I mean, alcohol was my master, and it absolutely is not anymore. And Alcoholics Anonymous and folks like the ones in this room, I mean, you guys helped me find the solution, and it's emotional because I never thought that I could have the life that I have today. I never thought that I could have the peace that I have inside today, and I'm forever grateful for this fellowship. And Steve, thank you so much. I think the world of you, man. Your recovery is amazing, and you got just this light about you, and I'm honored to be here tonight. So thank you guys for having me.